Good day, everyone. Welcome back to the GMT 8 football fan again. Hope you have been enjoying the World Cup 2026 so far. We are now in the midst of the knockout stages. Today, we are going to talk about the 3 minutes hydration breaks. One on the 22nd minute in the first half, and another one on the 67th minute in the second half. Virgil van Dijk famously mentioned this during interview, especially his comment on the commercial bit, which he doesn't like. We have to agree with him that if it is really hot, obviously it's good to have it. But if it started to become a standard for every match, then people will start to question the real reason of having a hydration break. Does it even be defined correctly as a hydration break? Well, before we look at the science, we must understand why this topic has become one of the biggest talking points during this World Cup edition. The hydration breaks were officially introduced to protect players from excessive heat under FIFA's guideline to be implemented when the wet bulb globe temperature or WBGT reaches 32 degrees Celsius or higher. But during the tournament, many fans, media commentators are asking the sole reason for doing this because it feels more like a convenient pause for television broadcasts, replays, and tactical discussions, and more like a commercial timeout than a medical necessity. But it is important to remember that in this public debate, we must find the fact. Broadcasters, coaches, and players all benefit from these breaks in different ways. And FIFA stated objective remains player welfare. But the controversy raises an important scientific question. Should every match receive the same hydration break, regardless of actual heat conditions? Or should the decision depend on heat stress that players are truly experiencing on the pitch? That's exactly what a scientific study attempts to answer. Instead of relying on opinions or speculation, it uses 15 years of weather data to advance physiological modeling to identify where heat risks are genuinely highest and how tournaments could be planned more effectively. Research was published in 2024 in Scientific Reports, part of the Nature portfolio, a peer-reviewed study investigating the potential heat risks that players could face during this World Cup. The research analyzed all 16 host cities across United States, Canada, and Mexico using 15 years of hourly weather data covering the period of 2009 to 2023. But what makes this study stand out is that it didn't just analyze the weather, it simulated the actual heat stress experienced by football players, taking into account factors such as the activity of running intensity, clothing, humidity, and reduced wind conditions often found inside stadiums. Their findings showed many host venues could experience elevated afternoon heat stress, with the highest risk concentrated in the southern United States and northern Mexico, particularly cities like Arlington, Houston, and Monterrey. So rather than asking whether the World Cup might be hot, this study asks a much more important question. How much heat stress will the players actually experience on the pitch? And this is what we are going to go through in this presentation. Of course, you may argue that the weather 5 years and longer ago is very different from the recent weather, which has been escalating to be really hot. But still, it is good to have a look, and this could be underreported if we look at weather pattern for so long ago. Before we discuss the finding, we need to understand why the researchers choose UTCI instead of the WBGT that FIFA is going to use today. Um, It's widely used for construction workers, military training, and sporting events because it measures the environmental heat hazard using air temperature, humidity, and solar radiation. So that's why FIFA's hydration break guidelines have traditionally been based on WBGT thresholds. However, football players don't just experience the environment, they generate a tremendous amount of body heat through continuous running, sprinting, and physical exertion during the match. That's why UTCI, or in full known as Universal Thermal Climate Index, becomes more useful. Besides the weather, UTCI also considers wind, clothing, and body heat balance, giving much better estimate of how hot it actually feels to a player on a pitch. Let's think it this way. WBGT tells you how hot the environment is, while UTCI estimates how much heat stress the human body is experiencing now. Because this study wanted to evaluate the physiological heat stress experienced by professional football players, not just the weather conditions, they chose UTCI as their better assessment tool for the research. And this is the foundation for their research going forward. Now that we understand the difference between UTCI and WBGT, the next question is, which heat index should we use for different situations overall? The answer depends on what people are doing. If the objective is workplace safety, such as protecting construction workers, military personnel, or industrial workers, WBGT remains the international standard. It was specifically designed for occupational heat management and is still the basis of many heat safety regulations worldwide. But once people begin walking, exercising, or playing sports outdoors, UTCI becomes much more informative. That's because it estimates how the human body actually experiences heat by combining air temperature, humidity, wind, solar radiation, and the body's own heat exchange. That's why UTCI is widely used in urban planning, outdoor thermal comfort research, pedestrian studies, and football performance analysis. It tells us not just how hot the environmental condition is, but how hot it actually feels to a person when you are out there. Of course, no single index is perfect. Human factors such as age, fitness, gender, hydration, and heat acclimatization also influence how we respond to the same environment. The key takeaway is this: WBGT is excellent for occupational heat safety, while UTCI is generally the better choice for understanding human thermal comfort and sports performance. There are no competitors, they simply answer different questions. So one of the biggest strengths of this study is that it looks beyond air temperature alone. If you imagine football matches both played at the 31 degrees Celsius air temperature at different locations, the condition appears identical, but in reality, the players could experience completely different levels of heat stress because the human body responds to much more than just temperature. Humidity affects how efficient sweat can evaporate. Solar radiation increases the amount of heat absorbed from the sun. So imagine one venue is very cloudy, one is basically clear sky. Wind speed determines how effective the body can cool itself. Then there are football specific factors such as continuous running, sprinting, player clothing, heavy sweating, and even the stadium environment, whether there are heat sources around for heat exchange, which can reduce natural airflow as well. Rather than treating players like stationary weather stations, the researchers incorporated all the factors into the UTCI to estimate the actual physiological heat stress experienced during the match. This is why the study provides a much more realistic assessment than simply reporting the air temperature. So two matches with same temperature can produce very different level of heat stress depending on the surrounding condition and the intensity of play. That's the key message of this study. It's not the temperature alone, and it's a combined effect of the environment that demands of playing football. Now, let's look at the results. Which host cities face the greatest heat risk? The researchers found that afternoon kickoffs consistently produce the highest level of heat stress, but importantly, not every host city carries the same level of risk. At the top of the list are Arlington, Houston, and Monterey, where the estimated UTCI equivalent temperature can reach nearly 50 degrees Celsius during the afternoon. At these levels, players are likely to experience significant physiological heat stress, increasing the risk of dehydration, fatigue, and reduced performance. A second group of cities include Miami, Atlanta, Kansas City, and Philadelphia, also present elevated heat stress, although generally not as severe as the highest risk venues. In contrast, Vancouver, Seattle, and Toronto offer much more favorable conditions, with considerably lower thermal stress despite the hosting World Cup matches. The message from the map is very clear. The 2026 World Cup does not have one uniform climate. There are substantially differences between host cities, and that led to the important question. If the heat stress is so different from one venue to another, should every city follow the same kickoff schedule? This is why the researchers argue that kickoff times matter and why adapting match schedules to local climate could significantly improve both player safety and quality of football. We know that this current World Cup edition has different kickoff time and also because of different time zones. Perhaps it's more catering to the worldwide audience at different time zones to watch it almost fairly. But yeah, this is something that is important from the climatic aspect. So what actually happens to a football player when heat stress becomes excessive? The study shows that the effect goes far beyond simply feeling uncomfortable. Heat stress affects both the body and the mind. First, players experience reduced concentration and slower decision making. In fact, a fast-paced game where split-second decision matters, even a slight decline in mental sharpness can lead to poor passes, missed tackles, and defensive mistakes. Physically, players are less able to sustain repeated high-intensity runs. As hydration uh, decreases, uh, muscle fatigue quickly sets in, sprint performance drop, and players naturally reduce their work rate to protect themselves from overheating. At the same time, the core body temperature continues to rise. The body sweats heavily in an attempt to cool itself, but in hot and humid conditions, sweat evaporates less efficiently. The study estimates that players in the highest risk venues can lose more than 1.5 kg of body mass per hour, primarily through sweat, significantly increase the risk of dehydration. All of this eventually affects technical performances. Passing becomes less accurate, body control deteriorates, and the overall quality of football begins to decline. That's why managing heat isn't about protecting players' health. It's also about protecting the quality, intensity, and fairness of the game itself. When they are forced to battle in that environment, they simply cannot perform at their highest level. And in the end, the fans also suffer from inferior quality football. So after analyzing all 16 host cities, the researchers reached a clear conclusion. The best solution isn't simply adding more hydration breaks, it's smarter planning before the match even begins. Their first recommendation is to optimize kick-off times. Since afternoon heat poses the greatest risk, especially in those three cities, scheduling more matches in the evening could significantly reduce players' heat stress. The study also recommends ensuring adequate hydration, allowing teams sufficient time to acclimatize to local conditions. considering each stadium's unique microclimate and can continuously monitoring environmental conditions throughout the tournament. The goal is simply protect players' safety, maintain high quality football, and ensure fair competition, especially when they play across the cities at the knockout stages. Personally, I think this is most important takeaway from the entire study. Instead of asking whether matches should have compulsory hydration break, perhaps we should ask why some matches need one in the first place. If hotter venues play after sunset, while cooler cities can safely host afternoon kickoffs, every team competes under more comparable physiological conditions. In my opinion, that's a fairer approach than giving every match the same treatment, regardless of the weather. Ultimately, science gives FIFA an opportunity to improve players' welfare without compromising the spectacle of the game. Smarter scheduling doesn't protect players, it also protects the quality of the football that fans around the world want to watch. So, how is the situation now? After 3 weeks of World Cup football, we can now compare partially the predictions with what actually happened. The result is quite remarkable. The study correctly identified that afternoon matches would present the greatest heat stress, and that's exactly what we're seeing during the tournament. The highest concerns have been concentrated in Houston, Arlington, Miami, and Monterey, while Vancouver, Seattle, and Toronto have generally experienced much more comfortable conditions. During this group stage of the tournament, 9 matches were played under severe heat stress conditions, exceeding the 28 degrees C WBGT threshold, where FIFPRO recommends considering delays or postponements. A further 13 matches were played in high outdoor heat, with climate control stadiums helping to reduce the on-field exposure. The pattern is also clear when we look at kick-off times. Afternoon matches were several times more likely to experience severe heat stress than evening matches, reinforcing the study's conclusion that kick-off time matters just as much as venue. Perhaps the biggest lesson isn't that hydration breaks are necessary. They certainly can be under extreme conditions. The bigger lesson is that the climate risk isn't the same everywhere throughout the entire tournament. A one-size-fits-all schedule across 16 host cities inevitably creates unequal playing conditions. This study shows that science can help us do better. By matching kick-off times to local climate, future World Cups can improve player safety, football quality, and competitive fairness. In many ways, the 2026 tournament hasn't disproved the research, it has actually validated it. So, before we wrap this out, it's interesting to look ahead to the 2030 FIFA World Cup, which will be hosted by Morocco, Portugal, and Spain. All three are still in the competition right now. And compared with the current tournament, I believe the overall challenge of managing heat stress should be considerably smaller. The reason isn't that Europe and Morocco are always cooler. They are not, but because the tournament is spread across a much more compact region with less climate variation. In 2026, host cities stretch across North America, spanning multiple time zones and vastly different climates, from the cool Pacific Northwest to the hot, humid southern United States and northern Mexico. That makes it extremely difficult to apply one scheduling strategy for every venue. By contrast, the 2030 hosts share broadly similar Mediterranean and Atlantic climates. Morocco will still require careful planning, especially for hotter inland cities, but the differences between host cities should be much more smaller. Traveling time will also be shorter, meaning less jet lag, better recovery, and more consistent preparation for teams. The lesson from this research is clear. One schedule doesn't fit every stadium. Instead of treating every venue identically, FIFA should tailor kick-off times to the local heat risk. Hotter cities can play after sunset, while cooler cities can safely host afternoon matches. Ultimately, smarter scheduling, not simply more hydration breaks, is the key to protecting players, preserving the quality of football, and ensuring fair competition. Hopefully, that's one of the biggest lessons from this tournament that we can learn and pass on to the next one. We also pray that there won't be a heat wave facing that region during the tournament like what we are facing now in Europe. So, who will win the World Cup now? Looking at it in terms of form, yeah, France is still going very, very strong. It looks like you need really strong nation tactics to be able to dismantle them. But at what it stands now, it looks like they are the clear favorites. Enjoy football, everyone. I hope you learn from this, and hopefully, yeah, if we are going to apply hydration breaks, let's do it. Yeah, I mean, let's put it in a context so we understand the need for that. Perhaps, as many people say, it is also a very good chance for coaches to basically reset the momentum, especially for those who are trailing the match. So the break also helps in that it helps to reset the other team who are suffering from under severe attack. But I mean the main objective of hydration breaks is the players' welfare and the quality of the game that we want to maintain. And if we're going to do it fairly, let's consider other matters as well, especially on the kill-off times to equalize all the host cities. That's all I want to say. Enjoy football, eat, drink, sleep, and breathe football. Bye for now. Take care.